and welcome to the second panel, and your participation is welcome. We just heard in Albania, more hugs and kisses. What an offer. And this also increases the quality of life, but in the long run, you can't make a living of it. We need bread and roses. So let's talk about the bread now. Let's talk about how we can actually strengthen the economy in our common Europe. Some say, or many say, it isn't looking too good right now. And this is why we opted for the title Global Dynamics, European Strategies, Navigating Expectations for Enhanced Competitiveness. For one container of goods produced in China, sent to China, we currently receive 3 containers of goods from China imported into the EU. And these containers include PV cells, wind power elements, components, and e-vehicles, things that we so urgently need for the implementation of the Green Deal. And this is why we want to talk about this. And I'm very much looking forward to the answers from this panel. And please cordially welcome with this His Excellency Vice President of the European Commission in Brussels, Margaritis Schinas. He actually looks at promoting diversity. And welcome, Margaritas Schinas. I would also like to introduce you to Professor Dr. Ursula. She will actually present the scientific view. She is a scientific manager, started her career here in Aachen, where she studied, and she also obtained her professor's degree, and I won't give away her title. And she actually wrote her PhD work on outliers and the probability of outliers in statistics. So she is familiar with statistics. She used to be rector of the Technical University in Dortmund and is the chairwoman of the Board of Trustees of the Alfried Krupp von Bohlen and Halbach Foundation in Essen. And she will provide us with a view from science and research. And yes, you can also give her a hand. I would like to welcome Daniel Quinten, who is happy that he was born in the middle of Europe. Right near Schengen. He's from the Saar region, and he has actually sucked up this European idea from childhood. He is the president of the EACB. This is the National Association of German Co-operative Banks. And he is also sitting on the board of this National German Association of all of the cooperative banks. And representing the perspective of business and especially SMEs and skilled craftspeople who are often forgotten, although they're so tremendously important, because you always look at the big groups of companies. We have SMEunited here from Brussels. Véronique Willems is the Secretary General, and this is the business association representing the interests of SMEs on the European level. 22.5 million SMEs with 42 million employees. So I'll join you now. My name is Anke Plättner. Over the past 3 years, I've acted as a facilitator, and I'm happy to be back at the Charlemagne Prize. Mr. Schinas, we're doing it in German now, the European way of life. This is your specific area. We're talking a lot about values, but we all know without business, without the economy paying for these values, it doesn't work. It doesn't play out. So how do we get the two things together? How do we secure this European way of life? How do we actually secure the free economy?
Yes, first let me tell you how happy I am to be in Aachen, probably the most European of all European cities. To answer that question, Anke, one has to take a broader macroscopic view of what happened during the last 5 years. That I had the honor to be part of the Commission team. The diagnosis was very simple, is that never before in the history of the European Union we faced so many threats, historic threats, existential threats. And never again Never before in the history of the European Union we took the kind of decisions of that caliber to face them. Unprecedented decisions. The biggest vaccination program in the history of mankind. The first recovery fund for a symmetric recovery after the pandemic. The first activation of a temporary protection status to welcome 6 million Ukrainian refugees less than 10 days since Russia's invasion. We bought weapons with taxpayers' money for a third country, Ukraine. We have done things that have never been done before. A few weeks before, we also managed to find an agreement for an EU pact for migration and asylum. So what's the conclusion of all this? The conclusion of all this is that to safeguard our way of life, our independence, our resilience, our competitiveness, we have to make it work as Europeans. Everything that pushes us to deviate from a consensus, we pay dearly. Everything we manage to agree amongst ourselves makes sense to the people, and at the same time comes at a lesser cost for governments. That's the essence of the European way of life, with something that we should be very proud about, but it's also something that we should continue defending and promoting. We cannot create them in laboratory conditions.
But if you look at business, we know what our strengths are in terms of our values, but let's be more concrete. Looking at business now, we are in a very keen competition, especially with China. Where do you see the biggest weakness of the European Union?
Well, there is a global race, a world-level Champions League tournament going on. Around 5 things that will determine our future. Energy, raw materials, microchips, talent, people, and our capacity to govern our digital transition. These are the 5 determinants. Europe is playing in this global race in all these 5 fields. And we have to make sure that we do not lose out. If not, we do not win in all of these 5 matches. We must be as strong as possible. When it comes to business, there is a temptation in certain capitals that somewhere in Brussels there is a competitiveness button, something like you can push and then the skies will open and we'll become more competitive. It doesn't work like this. For us to be competitive, we need to engage in these 5 areas. We need to create the conditions for a single market that is performing. That's the Enrico Letta report tabled a few days ago. And we also need to make sure that when it comes to key components for our competitiveness, raw materials, energy, microchips, talent, we are playing aggressively. We are playing offensive football, not catenaccio. This is a day for a Champions League semi-final, Bayern Real Madrid, so you would allow me all the football analogies. But we need to play offense as Europeans to make a difference for our business.
Okay, well, that's wonderful because after all, Dortmund won, and there are other important, strong things about Dortmund apart from football. There's a big science campus located in Dortmund. Let's focus on the strengths, Mrs. Gata. Mr. Schinas said we need talent apart from all of the other things. Do you also share this view? Yes, we can become competitive if we intensify certain efforts within the EU. And let's look at Dortmund. Yeah, why not? First of all, thank you very much for inviting me today. I would like to greet everyone here in the early afternoon. I think it is important to be clear about the fact that economic strength and competitiveness is for a reason. And what is the reason? I think that this is the precondition for well-being and prosperity in Europe. And prosperity also serves a purpose. Prosperity also strengthens peace, peaceful coexistence, further progress, and it also strengthens us to cope with crises. And this is why I think it is correct to speak about competitiveness, the competitiveness of Europe within a European comparison. What strengthens competitiveness most? And you just said it, I am firmly convinced that it is research, development, and innovation that actually make economies competitive. Without research and innovation, without investment in these areas, this will fail. Yesterday, we had a finding by Jean Tirole, Daniel Grof, and a third author in the FATS, who simply compared where Europe currently stands in terms of investment in research and development, and also in terms of the output created by this investment. Interesting figures. Of course, there is this ambition to invest roughly 3% in research and development of the gross national product. This was the ambition going back to 2000. We have not reached this yet. We're standing at 2.3% in the US, at 3.5% in China. You mostly do not know for sure. So this difference of magnitude also goes hand in hand with the composition. When you look at the state spending, then they're roughly the same in terms of percentage of the gross national product. But in the US, they're a lot higher in terms of private business investment and industry. And this is what brings us to this 3.5% in the US, although the percentage of state investment is roughly the same. Yeah, this would have been my next question. In how far does business have to invest more itself? Not every European country can do it by the same measure. Or is it a public task to also be jointly shouldered by the European Union? Yes, I think it is a public task, but it has its root causes. When you look at the composition of funding, where funding comes from and where it goes to in the US, almost 85% go to the high-tech area, AI, IT, etc. And in Europe, we're more in the mid-tech area, automotive, chemical industry, and production, manufacturing technologies. And when you then actually compare the profitability of these industrial areas, then the rentability is higher in the high-tech area than in the mid-tech, so that the ROI is higher there. And this gives you more funds to reinvest. And if we compare these figures, then the insight by the three authors, and one received the Nobel Prize, Europe falls behind for this reason as well, because the size of these areas differ so much, and Europe is not as strong in high-tech. You talked about our values and the strength of science and how we can strengthen it further. Let's go and look at the companies and the ones that pay for this. Mr. Quinten, where do you currently see Europe's weakness at present? Let's not focus on the strengths, but on the weaknesses. You often say red tape, regulation, we're too complicated. Is this really the point?
Well, Europe, as I see it, has always been developing great ideas, or let's say the European Union has been developing these ideas. Already at its founding stage to actually reintegrate a continent that had been torn apart by wars. You also alluded to my birthplace, which is in the vicinity of Schengen, and when these first treaties, these first agreements were signed aboard a boat on the river Mosel between 4 countries only, this was a great idea. Sometimes where we have difficulties is so with the implementation of these ideas. Just to give you 2 or 3 ideas, take the free liberties, the free freedoms. So they basically made that we allowed to do business wherever we wish in the European Union. But in practice, sometimes it doesn't work because taxation law has not been harmonized within the European Union. And take a German business that wants to establish a branch in Belgium. There's a huge bunch of red tape involved, and that sometimes prevent this business from setting up branches in other member states. Then also the so-called green asset ratio. Basically, it's a good idea. Again, take the assets of a bank and how many euros will pay in on the Green Deal, and all the banks in Europe will give you a figure between 0 and 5%. Why is this so? Basically for 2 or 3 reasons. Firstly, the definition, they are too narrow. And secondly, the entire transformation is not included. It's only included what is already green today, and then there are a lot of exemptions. For instance, a bank that wants to finance wind energy park, so then it cannot be included for certain definitions that have to be fulfilled. So we have enormously high bureaucratic hurdles that have to be overcome. That's
at times, companies are pretty happy to have these rules and regulations also for liability reasons. Very often these rules are also made by companies. It's not only policymakers.
Well, most rules and regulations that banks have to face do stem from European institutions. Just to give you one figure for this, there is this European banking authority, EBA, and it has been now in operation for about 10 years. And during these 10 years, so every fortnight, every 14 years, they issue a new rule. And they've been doing this for 10 years. And I sometimes wonder what else could still be regulated.
Clear message, less red tape, less bureaucracy. But we've heard this for quite some time. This has always been associated with the EU, but it is complicated to organize such a structure. Is this also what you hear, Mrs. Willems, from your companies, that makes companies less competitive than they probably could be?
Looking also at the results of our SMEunited SME barometer that we published last week, we see that European SMEs are indicating that the state therein is not really positive. We've seen a decline. We've had a very big dip during the pandemic. We had the recovery, then we had the disruption of the value chains, increasing costs of energy and commodities. The war in Ukraine made that even worse. And now we see that especially the northern member states, but also in the southern part, the small companies are slipping into a recession. So the state of our economy is not really healthy at the moment. I think everybody agrees on that. We are also facing important challenges on which the Commission decided to start working on with the work program they put forward in 2019, ensuring that we can take the digital and the green transition in a good way. A massive amount of legislation has been passed throughout this mandate to set the framework to guide the continent through that digital and green transition. But it will be key now to make sure that companies also get the tools and the instruments and the room of maneuver to put that into practice. And what we see is that especially all those small companies, and I want to give a bit of a picture, we have 24.7 million companies in Europe. That's the total amount. Of that 24.7 million, 22.7 have less than 10 employees. So that's a massive group that are really small companies. We have 44,000 big companies in comparison to 22.7 million small companies. So that's an important perspective that we have to take into account also in policy making. That's also why the Commission in 2008 put forward a Small Business Act with a very important principle: think small first. When we draft legislation or policy, we have to think, is this feasible for small companies? There's a lot of thinking and speaking. What we are asking now is that we also act according to what we're thinking and saying. And that is still a bit lacking. That's also our main demand for the European elections now. Make sure that when you draft legislation, that you make it on the capacity of the smallest companies. And if necessary, you add additional requirements for the bigger companies. What we have seen so far is that there's legislation drafted often because of some not correct behavior of a few big companies, and then there's a catch-all and everybody has to comply with that legislation. That doesn't work. That also creates among small companies at the moment that feeling of bureaucracy, administrative burden, it's too much. We put forward targets to be reached by 2030. I believe they have been agreed in 2022, that the targets have really been decided by Council and by the Parliament. When you set a target in 2022 to be reached by 2030, for a small company it's very difficult to still make those investments. Giving an example of a baker who bought a new gas oven in 2020. Depreciation period 15 years, so until 2035. If that baker in 2022 learns that he has to reduce CO2 emissions by 2030, that will never work because he will be stuck with an investment until 2035. So what we're asking, and where I think we should also cooperate more with European institutions, even more than we already do, is making sure that business reality perspective is taken into account and that we look at what do we want to reach, by when is this feasible, and what is necessary to get there.
This is exactly the problem. This is why you gave us a wonderful example with the baker. We have targets, we have the Green Deal. It's absolutely clear that CO2 emissions need to be reduced, all of that. But you all say that the economy is not doing too well. Isn't this overtaxing companies with what we have issued as a strategy, also with the Green Deal?
Well, let me first tackle the issue of regulation or regulatory burden, which is a recurrent theme. Let me assure everybody that nobody wakes up in the morning in Brussels, looks around and says, what am I going to regulate today?
No?
There is no hunger or appetite for regulation in Brussels. Actually, Brussels would be happy if we didn't have to regulate. We are not into a nanny state mentality. But let's also face it, many of the regulations that govern the logic of the single market are the direct consequence of things that went bad. If you want to take the example of all examples, is the fact that when the Euro crisis struck, 2010, there were no EU rules, common rules for banking supervision. We had Monsieur Trichet is joining us, we had a bank that issues a common currency, but everything else was different. The economic policies of our member states were different, our statistics rules were different, and there were no rules for banking supervision whatsoever. To such an extent that two of our member states, Cyprus and Ireland, precisely as a result of the total lack of banking supervision, they had managed to accumulate more private banking debt than public debt. So when there is a need for banking regulation, banking supervision, which, by the way, are now firmly rooted both in Brussels and in Frankfurt, this is because there was a societal need to set a regulatory framework so that this does not hit us again. So that's number one. Of course, there are areas where we still do not have common rules. Taxation is the biggest example. Should we have a common taxation rule? A common taxation framework across Europe? If you ask me, I would say why not? But there is no unanimity on the need to have a common European taxation, because this is one of the advantages that member states can leverage in the single market to attract investment through tax, where they cannot attract investment through industrial size or population size. So I don't want now to become very, to speak technical, but I would ask to go beyond the rather simplified approach to regulation. Regulation is the direct consequence of what happens to us. And a final point on regulation, many times, regulation also comes from the so-called gold plating, which is that national governments, when they incorporate EU law into their national law, they take the opportunity to gold plate these rules and add more and more different regulation. So it's a mixed picture. It's something that everybody is aware of. That's why our prime ministers, heads of state and government had asked now Mario Draghi to present in few weeks a major blueprint on Europe's competitiveness that would certainly have to address all these issues. But I finish as I started. The situation is more kaleidoscopic. It's not binary.
Well, that was not an easy answer. I would like to have a brief answer to another question. Let's talk about the Green Deal and the transformation, because you gave this wonderful baker's example. Is this overtaxing? Is it too much in view of all of the crises we are facing, the energy costs? Do we have to reroute our course, rechart our course, or do we have to stick to these targets in particular?
Okay, let me be more bland or less diplomatic on this. When the Green Deal was decided in Brussels, in the European Union level, the world was different. And we have to have the courage as Europeans, as policymakers, as politicians, to acknowledge that. At the time, we did not have two wars on our neighborhood. At the time, we didn't have inflationary pressure. At the time, we didn't have high energy prices. So we designed the green transition of Europe with a hand in our heart. It was a leap of faith. But we do not live in an exoplanet. We live in the real world. We know what has happened since. We know that some of these rules had had a disproportionate impact on the competitiveness of our industry, in our rural communities, and in the agriculture sector. And I don't think that I am revealing any big secret when I'm saying that we have already started to adjust many of these original requirements to the new geopolitical and economic environment. And everybody's telling us that we can do that without risking the overall transition goal, which is that by 2050, Europe will have to be the first decarbonized, fully decarbonized continent in the world.
How important is it, Mrs. Gata? Because we want to be climate neutral in 2050. This is the EU strategy. And we have to consider that China has the aim to become the world power number one by 2049. How do we reconcile these two things? Well, I don't have a solution for this either. If there was one, then we would all be happier. But I would also like to come back in terms of this question, that I think that the improved conditions for trailblazing innovations are an important aspect for competitiveness, because competitiveness thrives on new development and innovations, and we must not actually stop unleashing our energy. You said that regulation is always the result of bad experiences. Nevertheless, I believe that we are not really lagging so much behind other leading nations. When you look at APA and DARPA, this has 4 million. In Germany, in the European Innovation Council, we have 1 billion of money. But are they really invested in top technologies? Are we really protecting top research with it? And will we actually promote technological leapfrogs? Everybody said, yes, we have regulation, and that through a reformation of these good institutions in Europe, we could make head start, but it would be high time to comb this through as well. Well, now, with the transformation and the transfer of science into application, through easier regulation for startups, we would really make progress. I think this 1 billion caught in this European Innovation Council, this could be used better. Well, Terry Reinke is asking for 800 billion for a debt-financed EU investment program. Yeah, this is correct. Is it correct to incur debts? Well, I'm more of the liberal stance. I think that prosperity should be earned first before it is spent. How do you share this view, Mr. Quinten? If somebody says we have to spend more, then we have to incur debts for this, and this money must somehow be made available in order to pursue the strategies and the ideas we have.
Well, I'm perhaps repeating what I said earlier. I think the European Union has set itself the right objectives, and we have a lot of strengths in our European businesses. Our colleague alluded to it. We have a high number of SMEs in Europe, and the figure for Germany is well known. We have more than 3 million SMEs in Germany, and they actually account for more than 90% of the jobs in Germany. So we are very much capable of mastering this transition. So if we keep this liberty to all these entrepreneurs, we need this high degree of freedom. And that's where we started our discussion earlier. This is now being limited, this freedom.
The limited?
It is, indeed.
Well, if I say I want to somehow reduce CO2 emissions, then I need rules, then I need a directive or a regulation. It doesn't work any other way. How do I get?
So it's a difference whether I set a target that I want to reduce CO2 emissions by so many percent by 2050, or whether I decide to start at a low level setting up or agreeing on certain rules. So when we discuss about climate neutrality or the reduction of CO2 emissions as a bank, there is a first emission that is rather small, and then we have the balance sheet, and where the lever is much stronger. And actually, our colleague alluded to the baker that actually bought a new gas oven in 2020. So how can I support this baker to allow him that he can still move to a new source of energy, moving away from this gas oven to a more renewable energy source. But there we have to answer the question, do we actually give an impulse or an encouragement to the bankings to do that, or do I innovate? And this is certainly more better.
So your message is clear. Less regulation, more own initiative. Where do we have to change our strategies in view of the global crises?
To react what Vice President said, as SMEunited, we certainly also understand that there is a need for a regulatory framework. Often we even ask ourselves to have certain rules put in place to also ensure a level playing field for our small companies. So every society needs rules to function. That's the first thing. Secondly, we certainly don't want, or we don't ask the Green Deal targets to be reviewed. One of our entrepreneurs at a certain moment said, if there is no planet, I won't have a business either. And what we've seen in the past few years is that climate change is happening on our continent. We've had wildfires, we've had floods, we've had droughts, which heavily also impact on the economy and on especially small businesses. So the understanding that action has to be taken is certainly there. Now we also have the regulatory framework, we have the targets, and we now have to make sure that our entrepreneurs get the tools to get there. Tools means having technical assistance at local level to know in which technologies they have to invest to reduce their their CO2 emissions, how to get renewable energy implemented, how to reduce energy use, etc., etc. So that's an important element. Secondly, is indeed also making sure that they have access to funding and to finance. Our entrepreneurs are not necessarily asking for subsidies, because most of the time they first pay taxes and then they get potentially maybe subsidies back. Most of the time smallest companies do not always apply for subsidies because of the complexity of the application procedure. So what we need to do is make sure that there are financing instruments in place, and Europe has some very good financing instruments within the InvestEU with loan guarantees that are being used also by cooperative banks to leverage the public funding and make sure that you get more private money flowing and increase the whole amount of investment. But we see there that with the requirements of sustainable finance and so on, that the reporting period requirements, as you mentioned, are getting so complex that the amounts of loans granted have to be at a higher level, around 2.5 million at least, to be able to grant it in a profitable way. Our small companies, on average, require loans that are around 100,000 euros. So there you get again a distortion, and it's looking at the practicalities. And as you mentioned, the goals are okay, and now we have to see on how we implement in concreto and provide sufficient room of maneuver to do that. That's an important element. Vice President also referred to the Letta report. I think there are also a lot of proposals in there to move forward. There's also a chapter dedicated to the Capital Markets Union to really move there. And I agree with you that also member states still have to make some steps forward there to allow that European internal market and reaching the four freedoms in a fully fledged way. So there will be work to be done also to strengthen and reinforce the competitiveness of our continent in comparison to the US or China.
I would love to give you the opportunity to ask questions. If you use one of the microphones, then you're welcome to participate in our discussion. There is somebody at the back of the room. Would you please use the microphone? I'm blinded by the light, but please use one of the microphones.
Hello. Yeah, you see.
Yeah. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Alexandre and I'm a former laureate of the Charlemagne Prize for European Youth for France. Thank you for your intervention. I had a question regarding this frantic race toward competitiveness in our European economy. To win this competition among major global power, isn't one of the key issues to better protect our market by imposing wage and working conditions that respect human rights and workers' rights? I cite as an example the Online Platform Worker Directive recently passed in the European Parliament. This directive is an example that reduces mistreatment of workers, avoids heading towards the social race to the bottom, and prevents following the catastrophic remuneration and employment methods of countries outside the European Union. 72 million Europeans live below the poverty line. My question is, do you think that a competitiveness shock cannot be produced by a profound reform of the European labour market, completely respectful of workers, their remuneration, their working conditions, which truly take into account their suffering, and by reducing their weekly working hour? Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Schinas?
Okay. Let me start with something that probably some of you will find surprising, but it is not. That the European Union is by far the world champion of social and labor policies, by far. No one, I mean, Angela Merkel, in a memorable moment when she was having a joint press conference with Barack Obama during the financial crisis, and Obama was trying somehow to lecture Merkel and the Europeans. She reminded him that 6 out of $10 spent on social policies worldwide are spent in Europe. So let's clear this from the start. The challenge is to maintain this level of social spending, social protection, labor rights. We have the most developed system in the European Union for collective agreements, for inflation-adjusted wages. So I want to dissipate from the very start this big misunderstanding that somehow Europe is lagging behind. We're not. We're leading. And the examples that you mentioned of providing more protection to the new forms of labor, more vulnerable, like the platform workers. And
yeah, this is a very good question, yes. And I think we actually need more European cooperation, more accommodating each other, especially in the area of the young startups. When innovating with young people, we need a new approach. And this is why I can understand this question ever so well. So more exchange, again, it started with the Franco-German Youth Exchange, as we're sitting here. And also in terms of competitiveness, we have to opt for a concerted action to unleash energy. And I think this can work out. You mentioned it, limitation of losses brought forward for startups. And we can break new ground together very well here. And this is why the young woman's question can be answered very easily. Well, let's do more together in Europe. Yes, in more concrete terms, why should anybody invest in Europe, Mr. Schinas or Mr. Quinten?
Well, earlier on, I very much focused or emphasized the role of smaller banks. And at the very beginning, you alluded also to my European role as a chairman of the European Association of Cooperative Banks. And many other banks are also affiliated to our associations, also at global level, and we also have a very intensive exchange with partners of both the financial and non-financial sectors from all the regions of this world, so North America, also the Far East, and yes, Europe is still a very attractive place for investments for the financial sector, but also the real economy. So Europe also has a lot to offer to make itself attractive. Firstly, there is a high need for investment over the past few years with regard to digitization, also sustainability. Europe has not been investing enough. And secondly, whoever invests in Europe does invest in a place where is a high degree of legal security. And we discussed the state of our labor markets, social protection. We have very good data privacy rules. Private property is well protected in Europe. This is not often the case all around the world. So Europe is not an unattractive place.
Mr. Schinas, what did you...
Manager, but I'm a European. So the answer to this question is, in my view, pretty obvious, because A, we have the biggest and better regulated internal market in the world. B, the standards we set, be it technical, be it social, sooner or later become global standards. 3, we have the second world currency of reference. So whoever invests in Europe deals with euro, so euro is the other dollar. 4, we are the world's epicenter of democracy and rule of law. 5, we are the world champions of data protection, digital governance, human rights. And 6, we have universal and free systems for education and health covering everyone. Now, is this the end of the story? No, it's not. But I think there are sufficient reasons to attract investment and interest in Europe.
Then there's one more question. Yeah, we can cater to one more. Yeah, there's 2 more questions. You first, and let's combine the 2 questions to not run too late again.
Good afternoon. I have the following question.
My name is Sönke Morgenstern. I'm working for a company working in the building industry sector, and we're mainly doing research buildings. And this is actually tackling my question to you as part of the European political system and you as somebody from the banking system. We have a high burden currently facing when we try to make up things like an innovation hub, which usually needs infrastructure. The public sector is usually very slow, although they have a lot of money to invest, but they are not able to do so due to the regulations. And if we try to make it like a public-private sector combination or a private investment, then it's really, really tough to find funding for it. Again, due to regulation of the European rules and the banks who say, okay, this is a special kind of building and we cannot count it because it's not flexible if this usage is moving away. Mm-hmm. Do you have a strategy to actually use your available resources to get these things, which will be actually a nucleus for new economic strength to accelerate these processes?
Okay. And then one last question there.
Dankeschön. So I'm here representing the 2017 UK national winners of the European Charlemagne Youth Prize, and also to bring the well wishes of those of us in the UK who still wish to be a part of the European community. So thank you very much for having me. I have a point I'd like to make and a question I'd like to ask. And the point I'd like to make is, firstly, it's very heartening to see a representative of small, medium-sized businesses on the stage alongside larger organizations and the European establishment. There's a dignity and there's a great sense of pride to be found in creating your own prosperity through enterprise for small business owners and operators. And I think that at the moment there is an increasing move towards multinationalism, which takes money, taxation away from the communities where it's needed and out of circulation. And I think that the issue that then brings is that those companies are still just as able to fail, just as able to create massive job losses as any other business, but the implications of that are far greater, the dangers of that are far greater due to their size. My question is, how do you enable small businesses to compete with large multinationals which have such huge economies of scale? How do you enable them to survive in the modern economy? Thank you.
Thank you. Also 2 konkrete Fragen. Then we start with the last one maybe. Also Frau Willems, also wie schafft man es, wie erleichtert man es kleinen companies gegen multinationals?
As I'm happy with the question, and that's also the main message that we're bringing forward. As I mentioned, that's also why I gave the figures in the beginning of my intervention. It's also something policymakers have to realize more and more. And I think one of the important elements also in the ongoing discussion at the moment around security and defense and resilience is looking at how small companies ensure a diversified value chain, ensure livability in rural and remote areas, which are also important for security and defense towards the future. Ensure social cohesion, also very important towards democracy in the future. And in that perspective, that's also why we're now insisting more and more on the think small first and act accordingly. Making sure that rules and policies are developed with the smallest companies in mind, and then adding more requirements for bigger companies. And indeed also making sure that there is a level playing field and that multinationals also don't become too big to fail at a certain moment. We've had that discussion with banks in the financial and economic crisis. I think that's also an element to take into account when we're discussing security and defense towards the future.
We have to watch the clock, and this is why I would like to present the question to Mr. Quinten by Mr. Morgenstern. The projects that you can fund. This was Mr. Morgenstern's question, whether there's a strategy to promote things differently.
I think this also pays in on what just been mentioned by Mrs. Willems. Just to give you 2 or 3 more figures. We have the so-called single rule book with regard to surveillance of banks. So there is one same set of rules applicable to all banks. For instance, the biggest one is the French bank PNB with 300 billion of euros in their balance sheet. An average German bank is only slightly smaller than the biggest one, being the French PNB. So more than 60% of the costs actually are spent on compliance, on complying with rules that apply to banks. So that's the burden we have to.
I have to keep track of the time. We're always speaking about competitiveness. A few weeks to the European elections, Mr. Schinas, you talked about the strengths, the rule of law, the legal security, or legal safety rather. How dangerous is a right-wing populism if it increases for all of these elements?
One of my former bosses and one of my mentors in politics, Jean-Claude Juncker, used to say, answering this question, that as we approach the European election, we face two groups of citizens. The first are citizens who have genuine concerns about Europe, questions. They're asking, what is Europe doing about this, about that? And to this group of people, we owe answers and good policy. It would be a mistake to push them to the extremes. These are citizens that merit good policy and good reactions and answers. And then, according to Juncker, there is another group of people who are not interested in any answers. The only thing they are out is to destroy Europe. They will never be convinced of the usefulness of a big union. They want to live in a world of their own, cut from the rest, defending their own systems. In this second group, we need to get them before they get us. And the best way to do it is by going to vote in the European elections. So I think this is what we should do. We are a union of democracies. We should not be concerned. We should not be alarmist. The democracy is stronger than its enemies.